Last time on the podcast, we talked about preservatives, and we talked about what the differences are in regulations between America and Europe when it comes not just to preservatives, but all of skincare. Today in particular, we're talking about alternative preservatives. Now, again, alternative preservatives are that class of preservatives that are multifunctional, meaning that not only do they have a preservative ability of some sort, whether that's antibacterial or whether it's antifungal, or both, they also have, for example, an ability to moisturize your skin or enhance skin feel, or some of these ingredients are also commonly fragrance ingredients or fragrance fixatives. So they help to bind fragrance molecules and help that scent linger for longer. Today, in particular, and one more thing about alternative preservatives before we jump straight into it. They are not on Annex 5, which is the list of approved preservatives in the EU, because they're technically multifunctional. So let's get into it. We're starting with a big one, grapefruit seed extract. It's a natural preservative. It is still marketed as a natural preservative. It's actually, when it works as a preservative, adulterated. So years ago, grapefruit seed extract, and the acronym for this is GSE, was marketed as a natural preservative. It is still marketed as a natural preservative. It turns out it has no preservative efficacy on its own, and the grapefruit seed extract that exhibited antimicrobial properties was in fact adulterated with some pretty wicked preservatives, including benzethonium chloride, benzalkonium chloride, and parabens. Benzalkonium chloride and benzethonium chloride are both limited under EU's Annex 5 to 0.1%. Grapefruit seed extract has also been found to be contaminated with parabens and salicylic acid. So, steer clear of products containing grapefruit seed extract. Salicylic acid, when it comes to salicylic acid, so I'm not necessarily a hater of salicylic acid. The problem with it is that it is a beta hydroxy acid, so it encourages cellular turnover. And for me, protecting your skin is of primary importance. So anything that promotes cellular turnover is not something that I'm necessarily a fan of, and especially when it comes to alpha hydroxy and beta hydroxy acids. And the reason for that is because these work to lower, the way that these work is by lowering skin pH. And so it disrupts the essentially the glue that holds the desmosomes or the dead skin cells together. Now, the problem with them is your skin naturally makes enzymes that promote that desquamation process. And those enzymes have an optimal pH of around physiologic pH, which is about 7.4. So when you are applying ingredients that lower or work counter to that, so they're lowering your skin pH. And yes, at the surface of your skin, at the very top layer, that acid mantle is about 4.5 to 5.5. However, when you start going underneath that acid mantle, going through the layers of your stratum corneum, which are the dead skin layers, and we talked all about the layers of the epidermis in one of the very first podcast episodes. It's linked in today's show notes. When you start going through the layers of the stratum corneum, what happens is the pH gradient goes up pretty fast. So you go from a surface pH on top of the acid mantle. And again, this is on top of we actually have like a probiotic film layer on top of our skin. So when you go from that, through that to your skin itself, then start going down those approximately 30 cell layers thick of the stratum corneum, you begin to increase in pH pretty rapidly. And it doesn't take long before you get closer and closer to physiologic pH of 7.4. So when you're using a BHA or an AHA routinely, what's happening is you're disrupting that process, and it can lead to exacerbation of things like acne, can lead to things like dull skin, because you're not allowing your natural processes to work as they should. So maybe enough on that. So that's ultimately why I don't like seeing one of these ingredients as a preservative, because then you're using it every single day, and I feel like it's just too much. Salicylic acid. So before we move on from salicylic acid, this is also one of the reasons why ingredients like willow bark extract and radish root ferment filtrate work as preservatives. Now, one more note before we move on. While I don't recommend salicylic acid in your skincare, it along with any of those ingredients, so the willow bark extract, the radish root ferment filtrate, would be good considerations for your hair care, because your hair strand requires a low pH to keep the cuticle laying flat. So they are good choices for hair care. Now moving on to ferments as preservatives. And these are often mismarketed as probiotics. So radish root ferment. A variety of, actually, sorry, I've already said that. Okay. What is the problem with saying that radish root ferment and things like lactobacillus ferment are probiotics? Well, it's kind of like saying penicillin is a probiotic. So what's happening is, yes, penicillin is in fact an antibiotic, and so are the metabolic byproducts made by lactobacillus bacteria and whatever yeast mold bacteria is growing in the radish root ferment. For these ferments, it's not actually that the bacteria or the yeast are being added into your skincare product. It's that the metabolic byproducts of the yeast or bacteria are isolated from the bacteria or yeast, and then those ingredients or those compounds are added to your skincare products. So in the same way, it's kind of like, it's going back to the penicillin example. The penicillin mold isn't being used as an antibiotic. Penicillin that's extracted from the mold. So this is true of any organism. When inside your body, compounds and ingredients are broken down into something else. And it's the same way for these bacteria. And oftentimes these bacteria will create molecules that are antimicrobial in nature to other bacteria so that they are able to keep a monopoly on the space, right? They don't want other bacteria coming along and killing their colony. So therefore they create defensive compounds that protect their colony. And this is what's happening, and that is what's going into your skincare. So to be honest, for years, I thought that these metabolic or these ferments were the next grapefruit seed extract scandal. And that's one of the reasons I shunned this class of preservatives for years. It was impossible to figure out what, well, I say it was impossible. It felt very hard to figure out what that ferment was comprised of. What are the compounds in that ferment that are enabling it to be antimicrobial? So what are the compounds that enable it to be antimicrobial? When it comes to radish root ferment, one of those compounds is ninhydrin, and this is used in forensics testing to pick up fingerprints. Ninhydrin reacts with the amine and amino acid residues, and it just doesn't seem like a great ingredient for skincare. So for that reason, I don't like to use radish root ferment. The other reason why I've dismissed radish root ferment as a possible preservative is because it contains around 20% of salicylic acid. And as I previously mentioned, that is something that I just do not like to see in skincare used routinely. The other compound in radish root ferment that allows it to act as a preservative is bacteriocin. And bacteriocins are a whole class of compounds rather than a single compound. Structurally, they're peptide chains, which is essentially short chains of amino acids, or they're proteins. So that would be a long amino acid chain with secondary and tertiary structure. So the bacteriocins are also, so these are very specific. There can be, because there are multiple different ways that you can link together amino acid in different sequences. Of course, that's why there are so many different peptide sequences, so many different proteins within your body and, you know, everywhere else as well. So the bacteriocins are also why lactobacillus ferment works as a preservative. So with radish root ferment, there are essentially three classes of compounds that contribute to its preservative efficacy. One of those being the ninhydrin, which again is used for fingerprint, to pick up fingerprints in forensics. One of those is salicylic acid, and then the third is bacteriocins. When it comes to lactobacillus ferment, which is another really popular option these days in natural skincare and as a natural preservative, bacteriocins are the reason. Bacteriocins serve as the preservative or the antimicrobial compound in that ferment. And based on everything I've seen, I'm currently sold on lactobacillus ferment as a natural preservative. And so this was something that just to be as natural as possible, the brand is migrating towards using lactobacillus ferment. It alone generally does not provide enough, or it straight up so far is not enough on its own. So it does require coupling with potassium sorbate or sodium benzoate. And in one case, so for the Leave No Trace cleanser, which is especially problematic to preserve, I've not yet developed a robust enough alternative preservative system to eliminate the phenoxyethanol that's in that blend right now, or in that formula right now. So what you will find on Rain Organica's site is the two face creams, so First Light Day and Night Lotion, and also Eventide Night Lotion, along with the toner. Now all contain lactobacillus ferment and potassium sorbate as the preservative system. Let's see. Why is the cleanser so much harder to preserve? One of the things that we didn't talk about last time is the fact that essentially anytime you have anything other than a solely water-based product, so anytime you have a lotion or a cream, and the cleanser is cream-based or is quite creamy in consistency, anytime you have a lotion or a cream, you have an emulsion between water and oil-soluble ingredients. And many preservatives are more oil-soluble than they are water-soluble. And what this does is it concentrates your preservative in the oil phase of the product so that there's less water, or there's less preservative available in the water phase, which is where the bacteria grow. So usually what this means is when you have more oil in a formula, you have to use more preservative in order to overcome and keep your concentration in the water phase high. Now, for the cleanser, there's the added problem, I guess you could call it a problem. There's the added concern of having Dead Sea mud in the mix. And anytime you add a clay, so whether that's Dead Sea mud, whether that's French clay, kaolin clay, illite clay, honestly, any of the clays, sea clay, what happens is those clays are notorious for absorbing compounds. And this is true. I mean, this is one of the reasons why they work so well for helping to brighten your skin, is because they are great at absorbing impurities from your skin. It also means that they can absorb these preservative molecules as well. And so then they're essentially binding onto these, so they're not available to preserve in the larger formulation. So for that reason, the Leave No Trace cleanser is especially difficult to preserve. It is something that I'm hoping to be able to announce later this year that I've been able to work around and eliminate the phenolcyethanol from that formula as well, because again, ultimately would like to be using natural preservatives as much as possible. And again, we'll talk about how what natural really means in a future episode. In the meantime, all of the other products currently available at Rain Organica are either preservative free when they're oil based, when they're oil only, or contain the lactobacillus ferment and contain the lactobacillus ferment and contain a combination of the lactobacillus ferment along with either potassium sorbate or sodium benzoate. So, and the other thing, Rain Organica has moved to a better option for a chelator. So I was using EDTA for a really long time. And again, this is based on its long history of use, its safety. The big concern with it is the biodegradation portion of it, because it does take forever to break down once it's in the environment, and it's becoming ubiquitous in the environment because it is widely used in fertilizers and other, it's everywhere. And so instead of continuing to contribute to that problem, Rain Organica has switched to alternative chelators as well. Sodium phytate is the one of choice. And again, in the last episode, I talked about how quercetin is also a chelator and how it's not one that I prefer. And citric acid is used as well in some of these formulas. The thing with citric acid is not as strong of a chelator. So comparatively speaking, it's not as strong as sodium phytate, or doesn't work as well as sodium phytate in the situations that I've used it in. The other problem with citric acid is that it will lower pH of the product. And one of the things about Rain Organica, I strive to keep all the products around that pH of 6.0. And again, this was something I talked about, the logistics and the justification for that in one of the earlier episodes about how your skin works and why this is working with natural processes rather than against those processes. So, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you found this episode beneficial along with the last one. Please reach out with any questions or concerns that you have about about the ingredients that I've talked about in the past couple of episodes. In addition, if there's one that I didn't mention, please reach out with your questions about it as well. This is by no means fully comprehensive. This is just some of the more mainstream preservatives and alternative preservatives. So with that, until next time, bye. Okay, so this is by no means a comprehensive overview of all of the preservatives and alternative preservatives out there. Rather, this is taking a look at the ones that are more mainstream in both categories. So if you have a question either about one of these that we've talked about or about any others out there, please reach out to me at hey@rainorganica.com. As always, thank you so much for listening. Take a quick sec to share this episode with a friend and also to leave a review. When you send that review over to hey@rainorganica.com, so just a screenshot of that review, you'll receive a code for free shipping on your next order at Rain Organica. Thank you again so much for listening, and until next time, bye.